August 3, 1943, near Nicosia, Sicily. The field hospital serves the U.S. 7th Army. It is positioned behind the advancing front, close enough to hear artillery, far enough to receive men pulled from the line. Medical staff move quickly. Records are clipped to cots. Most patients carry visible wounds. Private Charles H. Kuhl, an American infantryman, does not. His medical report lists no shrapnel injuries, no gunshot wound. He was evacuated because his company officers reported that he was no longer able to fight. During recent engagements, Kuhl had broken down under sustained shelling. He complained of intense fear. He could not return to his position. Army doctors diagnosed him with combat exhaustion, a condition recognized but poorly understood in 1943. The prevailing doctrine was simple. Most cases were temporary. Men were stabilized and sent back to their units as quickly as possible. Private Kuhl was waiting for that decision when General George S. Patton, commander of the 7th Army, entered the hospital during an inspection tour. Patton was not there to review medical theory. He was there to assess fighting strength. What followed would not remain confined to this tent. By the summer of 1943, the war had shifted. The Allies were no longer retreating, they were advancing. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, began on July 9, 1943. More than 160,000 Allied troops landed under chaotic conditions. Strong winds, scattered drops, confused landings. For the American 7th Army, commanded by General George S. Patton, the campaign quickly became a grinding test of endurance rather than a clean breakthrough. The terrain worked against the infantry. Narrow mountain roads. Stone villages turned into fortified positions. German and Italian forces used high ground, artillery, and delaying tactics to slow every advance. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Each village required assault. Each assault brought casualties. For soldiers like Private Charles H. Kuhl, the pressure was constant. Artillery fire came without warning. Mortars fell day and night. Units advanced, halted, and advanced again under orders that left little time for rest. Sleep deprivation became normal. Fear accumulated. At this stage of the war, the U.S. Army still viewed psychological collapse through a narrow lens. Combat exhaustion existed in manuals, but it was treated as a temporary failure, not an injury equal to a wound. The priority was manpower. Infantry losses were heavy and replacements were limited. Men who could not fight were removed from the line, but only briefly. Field hospitals were not sanctuaries. They were holding areas. Soldiers were expected to recover quickly and return to combat. Doctors were under pressure. Commanders were watching numbers closely. General Patton watched them more closely than most. He believed battles were won by momentum, by aggression, by refusing hesitation. To Patton, fear was not just a personal weakness, it was a contagious threat that could spread through a unit under fire. That belief would soon collide with the reality, inside a medical tent in Sicily. The invasion of Sicily began in darkness. On the night of July 9–10, 1943, Allied forces crossed from North Africa toward the island in one of the largest amphibious operations of the war to that point. The plan relied on precision. It did not get it. High winds scattered airborne units across the countryside. Paratroopers from the U.S. 82nd Airborne landed miles from their intended drop zones. Some landed in olive groves, others in flooded fields. Small groups fought isolated actions for days before rejoining larger formations. At dawn, infantry came ashore by sea. American troops landed along the southern coast near Gela, Licata, and Scaglietti. Many units disembarked under fire. Landing craft grounded early or late. Equipment was lost in surf. Units mixed together before they even reached the beach. German and Italian defenders reacted unevenly but decisively in key areas. Counterattacks followed quickly. At Gela, German armor pushed close enough to the beaches that naval gunfire had to be called in to stop them. For the infantry, the message was immediate. This would not be an easy landing followed by rapid movement inland. Once ashore, the fighting became relentless. Advances moved through hills and towns where defenders could withdraw, regroup, and strike again. There were no clear front lines, only constant contact. For Patton's 7th Army, speed mattered. He pushed units hard, demanding rapid movement toward objectives. Delays were treated as failures. Aggression was rewarded. Hesitation was not. Soldiers like Private Charles H. Kuhl did not experience Sicily as a single dramatic landing. They experienced it as days of broken sleep, sudden explosions, confusing orders, and unbroken tension after arrival. By the time Kuhl was sent to a medical tent, the landing was weeks behind him, but its psychological effects were not. And that disconnect, between how commanders measured success and how soldiers absorbed the fighting, was about to surface. August 3, 1943. U.S. 7th Army Field Hospital near Nicosia, Sicily. General George S. Patton was conducting an inspection. These visits were routine in form but absolute in authority. Patton moved through units, supply areas, and medical facilities to assess combat readiness. He believed war was won by willpower as much as weapons, and he expected that belief to be reflected everywhere under his command. When Patton entered the hospital tent, he saw rows of wounded men, bandages, stretchers, blood-stained uniforms. These were injuries he recognized and accepted. Then he stopped at a cot where no physical wound was visible. The soldier was Private Charles H. Kuhl. Patton asked why the man was there. Medical staff explained that Kuhl was suffering from combat exhaustion. He had been evacuated after breaking down under sustained artillery fire. He had not been accused of desertion. He had not refused orders. He had been removed because he could no longer function in combat. Patton rejected the explanation. To him, exhaustion without injury was fear, and fear, in Patton's command philosophy, was dangerous. He believed that allowing soldiers to escape the line without visible wounds undermined discipline and encouraged others to do the same. Witnesses later reported that Patton became visibly angry. He accused Kuhl of cowardice. He ordered the man out of the hospital. He struck him with his gloved hand. The action was brief but unmistakable. Medical staff stood frozen. No one intervened. Patton then issued an order that was recorded by witnesses and later confirmed in reports. Soldiers hospitalized for what he considered cowardice were to be returned to their units immediately. This was not a battlefield decision. It was a command judgment made inside a medical facility. Patton left the tent and continued his inspection as if nothing unusual had occurred. But the incident did not end there. Officers and medical personnel understood immediately that what they had witnessed violated Army regulations and medical authority. Reports were written, names were attached, and the information began moving up the chain of command. What happened next would decide whether Patton's philosophy or the Army's would prevail. Within days of the incident at the field hospital near Nicosia, written reports began circulating through 7th Army headquarters. The accounts were consistent. A commanding general had struck a hospitalized soldier. Medical officers had been overruled. A diagnosis of combat exhaustion had been dismissed as cowardice. The matter reached Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, Patton's subordinate and a senior commander with first-hand knowledge of frontline conditions. Bradley did not view the incident as minor. He understood the strain on infantry units and the fragile balance between discipline and morale. He forwarded the reports without alteration. By mid-August 1943, the information reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander in the Mediterranean. Eisenhower was already managing political pressure, coalition tensions, and public scrutiny following the invasion of Sicily. Patton was valuable, but he was also volatile. Eisenhower ordered a formal inquiry. The investigation confirmed two separate incidents. The first involved Private Charles H. Kuhl on August 3. A second, similar incident occurred on August 10, involving another soldier diagnosed with battle fatigue. In both cases, Patton physically struck the men and ordered them returned to the line. Eisenhower's response was deliberate, not immediate. He understood Patton's importance as an aggressive commander, but he also understood the consequences if the incident became public. The U.S. Army could not be seen tolerating the abuse of its own soldiers, particularly those under medical care. Eisenhower issued a private reprimand. Patton was ordered to apologize personally to the affected soldiers, their units, and the medical staff present. More significantly, he was relieved of operational command for the remainder of the Sicily Campaign. Patton would not lead troops in combat during the next phase of the war. The decision was not announced publicly. Official statements cited routine command adjustments, but within the officer corps the message was clear. Patton's authority had limits, and he had reached them. For Patton, the moment was devastating. He believed he had enforced discipline. Instead, he had exposed a fault line between battlefield command and the human cost of war. And that fault line would follow him into history. The consequences of the hospital incidents unfolded quietly, but their effects were lasting. General Eisenhower's reprimand was not symbolic. It altered Patton's trajectory at a critical moment in the war. During the final stages of the Sicily Campaign, Patton, one of the most aggressive field commanders in the U.S. Army, was removed from frontline leadership. While other generals advanced toward Messina and prepared for the next phase of operations, Patton was sidelined, assigned to administrative duties and ceremonial roles that carried rank but no battlefield authority. Within the officer corps, the episode reshaped how Patton was viewed. Many senior commanders respected his results but now questioned his judgment. Omar Bradley, who had long admired Patton's drive, later wrote that the incident revealed a dangerous blind spot. Patton understood weapons, terrain, and movement, but he struggled to accept the limits of human endurance. For the U.S. Army, the incident forced an uncomfortable reassessment. Combat exhaustion, often dismissed early in the war, could no longer be treated as simple weakness. Reports from Sicily, North Africa, and earlier campaigns showed that even experienced, disciplined soldiers could break under sustained pressure. Medical officers gained greater authority to remove men from the line without interference from combat commanders. While progress was slow, the institutional shift had begun. The soldiers at the center of the incident disappeared quickly from public record, as most enlisted men did. Private Charles H. Kuhl did not become a symbol during the war itself. There were no public statements, no press coverage, but his case, documented in official reports, became part of the internal record that shaped Army policy. He represented thousands of infantrymen whose psychological injuries were invisible but real. Patton, meanwhile, carried the weight of the incident personally. He wrote letters expressing remorse and accepted Eisenhower's orders without protest. Those close to him noted a change, not a softening of his belief in discipline, but a recognition that his career now depended on restraint as much as aggression. Ironically, the very qualities that made Patton dangerous in Sicily made him indispensable later. In early 1944, Patton was placed in command of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group, a key component of the Allied deception plan prior to the Normandy invasion. German intelligence believed Patton was the Allies' best offensive commander. His sidelining after Sicily made that belief plausible. While the real invasion forces landed in Normandy, Patton remained in England, visible, vocal, and intentionally inactive, convincing the enemy that the main blow had yet to fall. When Patton returned to combat command after D-Day, he did so under closer supervision. The Army had not forgiven him, but it had not discarded him either. He led Third Army across France with extraordinary speed, proving once again his ability to conduct mobile warfare at scale. Yet the Sicily incident followed him. It surfaced in internal discussions. It reappeared in post-war memoirs. It became central to debates about leadership, discipline, and morality in modern war. The army emerged changed. Psychological casualties were increasingly recognized as legitimate, not fully understood, not always well treated, but no longer ignored. Patton emerged altered as well, still brilliant, still volatile, but permanently marked by the moment when his philosophy collided with the limits of the men he commanded. The war moved on, victories followed, defeats were endured. But in one quiet hospital tent in Sicily, the U.S. Army learned that winning battles required more than demanding courage. It required understanding the cost of fear. That realization would shape how future wars were fought, and how history would remember the men who fought them. The incident in Sicily was a collision of battlefield necessity and human limitation. Patton demanded aggression, believing fear was a weapon to be crushed. Soldiers like Private Charles H. Kuhl revealed the invisible cost of war, psychological strain that no strategy could erase. The Army learned that discipline alone could not sustain fighting men. Patton's career continued, marked by brilliance and controversy, while the Army began to recognize combat exhaustion as a serious condition. In the end, the event illustrated a fundamental truth. Victory required not only force, but understanding the fragile line between courage and survival. It was a lesson in leadership, human endurance, and the limits of even the most formidable commander.